She was just doing her job. He was just a patient. But the moment her hands touched the scars no one had dared go near in 11 years, 7 armed men stopped breathing, and Tae-Joon Song closed his eyes for the first time in a decade. The hallway of Jauncey Elite Medical Center smelled like fresh paint and old secrets. Alana Hayes walked it at 6:47 a.m., coffee in one hand, patient files tucked under her arm, sneakers squeaking softly against floors so polished she could see her own exhaustion staring back at her. She was 29, black, American. 4 months into a one-year contract in Seoul that her colleagues back in Atlanta had called either the bravest or the dumbest decision you've ever made. She called it a fresh start. Her last hospital had been loud, underfunded, and heartbreaking in ways she never talked about. Seoul was supposed to be clean, simple, professional. She pushed open the door to room 312 and stopped. The room was wrong, not the furniture, not the lighting, the energy. 6 men in dark suits stood along the walls like statues, hands folded, eyes locked on her the moment she entered. A 7th stood directly beside the bed, one hand resting near his jacket. On the bed sat a man, tall even sitting, broad shoulders filling a hospital gown like it was tailored, dark hair slightly disheveled, a jaw carved from something colder than stone. His eyes found hers immediately, not curious, not threatening, just watching. Alana glanced at her file. Room 312. Song TJ. Shoulder restriction, chronic muscular tension, referred for physiotherapy evaluation. She looked back at the 7 suits, then at him. Mr. Song, she said, her voice calm in the way only someone deeply tired learns to be calm. The man beside the bed stepped forward. You have the wrong room. Alana checked her file again. I have the right room, she replied simply. Nobody moved. And from the bed, in a voice that carried the quiet weight of absolute authority, let her in. Alana set her bag down professionally, ignoring the suits watching her every breath. She ran through her standard evaluation. Range of motion, muscle resistance, spinal alignment. Everything was textbook until she moved behind him. Her fingers traveled his upper back methodically. Professional. Automatic. Until her palm landed flat against a ridge of thick, uneven skin running down the center of his spine. She didn't flinch, but the entire room did. One guard inhaled sharply. Another's hand disappeared inside his jacket. A third took one slow step forward. Because nobody touched those scars. Not in 11 years. The skin beneath her palm felt like hardened wax poured over bone. Brutal. Old. The kind of damage that came from something meant to kill. Alana's training said, move, apologize, step back. But Tae-Joon's breathing had changed. Not rage, not pain. Stillness. Like a man suddenly standing inside a memory he hadn't visited in years. Ma'am. The guard's voice was tight. Remove your hand, now. Alana didn't move, because Tae-Joon hadn't told her to. Seconds stretched. The room felt vacuum-sealed. Then, slowly, Tae-Joon turned his head. His dark eyes found hers over his shoulder. The guards collectively stopped breathing. And in a voice so quiet it could have been mistaken for silence, he said, leave it. 2 words, but they landed like a verdict. The guard who had reached for his jacket slowly withdrew his hand. Another exchanged a stunned glance across the room. Because in 11 years, no specialist, no surgeon, no person alive had touched those scars and been told to stay. Alana held her position, her hand steady. Does it hurt? She asked quietly. Tae-Joon's jaw tightened slightly. No, he said. Good, Alana replied. Then we can work with that. The session ended 10 minutes later. Alana packed her bag calmly, noted her observations, and walked out like she hadn't just done something every medical professional in Seoul had failed to do. The guards stared after her, then looked at each other. then looked at Tae-jun. He was already staring at the window. The next morning, Alana received a reassignment notice. New patient, different floor. She assumed it was routine until her supervisor called her aside, voice low, eyes nervous. The patient in 312 requested you personally. Alana blinked. He spoke to administration? Her supervisor nodded slowly. His people did. She returned to room 312 that afternoon with fresh files and the same steady hands. But this time, the energy was different. Tae-jun was already seated when she entered. Jacket off, back straight, eyes forward, like he'd been waiting. Alana noticed but said nothing. She prepared her materials, heat pack, therapy oil, fresh towel. You came back, he said. You requested me, she replied simply. A beat of silence. Most people find reasons not to return, he said. Alana placed the heat pack against the scarred tissue. I'm not most people. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably. This woman spoke to their boss like he was a person, not a title, not a threat. Tae-jun's jaw moved slightly like he was deciding something. The others were afraid, he said. Of what? Alana asked, adjusting pressure carefully. He didn't answer immediately, then, quietly, of what they might find. Alana's hands didn't stop moving. Scars don't scare me, Mr. Song, she said. Untreated ones do. The room went very still. And for the first time in longer than anyone in that room could remember, Tae-jun Song almost smiled. By the fourth session, something had quietly shifted. The guards still watched, but differently now. Less like predators, more like witnesses. Because every time Alana entered that room, Tae-jun's shoulders, those fortress shoulders, dropped half an inch. It was barely visible, but they all saw it. During the fifth session, a different tension entered the room. Tae-jun spoke first. You're not Korean. Observant, Alana replied dryly. Why Seoul? She worked along the upper scar line before answering. Needed a change? From what? A pause. Her hands kept moving. A hospital back home. Lost a patient I shouldn't have lost. Needed somewhere that didn't remind me of it every morning. Silence. Then Tae-jun said something unexpected. Did it work? Alana considered that honestly. Some days. He nodded slowly like that answer meant something only he understood. 3 sessions later, Alana arrived to find the room rearranged. The therapy table had been moved beside the window. The city lights of Seoul spread across the glass like scattered diamonds. You moved the table, she said. Better light, Tae-jun replied. Alana raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Halfway through the session, she pressed along the deepest part of the scar tissue. Tae-jun exhaled, long, controlled, like something releasing that had been locked for years. That, Alana said quietly, is the first time your body hasn't fought me there. Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. Maybe it's learning, he said. Alana smiled slightly, more to herself. Bodies are smarter than we give them credit for. Another silence. Comfortable now. Different from the first day. Then one of the guards, the youngest one, the one who always stood nearest the door, spoke so quietly it was almost accidental. Boss hasn't slept well in years since last week. He has. Every head turned toward him. The young guard immediately looked at the floor. Tae-jun didn't deny it, and Alana kept her expression professional. But something warm moved through her chest that she had absolutely no business feeling. It was 9 p.m. when Alana arrived for an emergency session. Tae-jun's shoulder had locked completely, the worst it had been in months. His head of security had called her, directly, voice stripped of its usual authority. She found Tae-jun standing at the window, one arm hanging slightly wrong, jaw clenched against pain he refused to acknowledge. Sit down, Alana said immediately. I'm fine. You're lying. She guided him firmly to the chair. Sit. He sat. She worked quickly, a heat first, then careful manual pressure, unlocking the seized muscle group with focused precision. Tae-jun breathed through it, silent, controlled. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke. I was 26. Alana's hands didn't stop. There was a warehouse, south of the city, a meeting that was supposed to end a war between two organizations. He paused. Instead, someone locked the doors from outside. The room was absolutely silent. The gasoline was already poured. I could smell it before I heard the first flame. Alana pressed carefully along the central scar. The tissue was angry tonight, tight, remembering. My second in command, Tae-jun continued. The man I trusted. Most. He was the one who locked the door. The youngest guard looked at the floor. I broke through a steel wall to get out, Tae-jun said quietly, but I couldn't break what it did to me inside. Alana stopped. She moved in front of him, looked directly at him. The man who did it, she said carefully. Where is he now? Tae-jun's eyes met hers. Dark. Still. That, he said slowly, is what I've spent 11 years trying to answer. The shoulder finally released under her hands. But it was the silence afterward that felt loudest. November arrived cold and quiet over Seoul. The sessions had moved to Tae-jun's private residence, a penthouse above the harbor, all glass and sharp angles and controlled silence. But inside the therapy room he'd converted, something uncontrolled was growing. Alana noticed it in the small things first. Green tea waiting on the side table every session. The exact blend she'd mentioned once, casually, weeks ago. A book left on the chair beside the therapy table. A novel by a Nigerian author she'd referenced in passing. She never mentioned noticing. Neither did he. One evening, halfway through a session, Tae-jun laughed. Not loudly, not warmly even. More like a sound that had forgotten how to come out. Alana had said something dry about his shoulder being as stubborn as its owner. He'd laughed. One of the guards actually looked alarmed. When did you last do that? Alana asked quietly. Tae-jun considered it seriously. I don't remember. She nodded and kept working. But the air between them had changed. Something fragile and warm lived in it now, unspoken, careful, real. That night, as she was leaving, Tae-jun spoke from across the room. Alana. It was the first time he'd used her first name. She turned. The reason I let you touch the scars, he said slowly, like each word was being chosen carefully. It wasn't because you were professional. She waited. It was because you weren't afraid of what they meant. Alana held his gaze for a long moment. They're just scars, Tae-jun, she said softly. He shook his head slightly. To everyone else, he replied, they were a warning. She left without answering, but she didn't sleep that night. 3 days later, Alana's world cracked open. She arrived for the evening session to find the penthouse atmosphere completely changed. Guards doubled, faces stone cold. The youngest one, the one who'd mentioned Tae-jun sleeping again, was gone. Tae-jun stood at the window, back to the door, fully dressed, jacket on. We're canceling tonight, his head of security said. Alana set her bag down. Is he injured? It's not your concern. His shoulder is absolutely my concern. Miss Hayes. The man's voice dropped. Leave. She looked past him at Tae-jun. He hadn't turned around. That silence hurt more than she expected. Found out through hospital gossip 2 days later. The man who had locked the warehouse door, Tae-jun's former second-in-command, had resurfaced. Walked into a restaurant in Itaewon and told anyone listening that Tae-jun's song was soft now. That a foreign woman had been touching his scars. that the most feared man in Seoul was letting himself be handled. The words spread fast in the world Taijun moved in. He called her that evening, one sentence, flat voice. The sessions are over. Alana stood in her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, chest tight. Because someone talked? She asked. Silence. Taejun? You should return to Atlanta, he said. Your contract can be terminated early. You'll be compensated. The call ended. Alana stared at the wall, then slowly sat down on the floor. Because she understood now what she'd been refusing to name for weeks. She hadn't just been treating his scars, she'd been falling into the space behind them. 4 days of silence. Alana didn't call, didn't go to the hospital, didn't chase. She packed slowly, booked a flight, told herself this was always temporary, told herself she was a professional, not a fool. Then she found the book on her shelf. The Nigerian novel. The one she'd mentioned once in passing weeks ago. She opened the cover. Inside, in careful handwriting she recognized immediately. For the woman who wasn't afraid of what the scars meant. TJ. She sat with it for a long time. Meanwhile, across the city, Taijun stood in a room with the man who had locked the warehouse door 11 years ago. They were alone now. No guards, just 2 men and 11 years of debt. The man smiled. I heard you found someone. Taejun said nothing. She's making you weak, the man said simply. Taejun looked at him, really looked, for the first time in over a decade. No, he said quietly. She's making me remember what I was before you took everything. The man's smile faded. Strength isn't the same as feeling nothing, Taejun continued. I spent 11 years confusing the two. He stepped forward once, and she fixed that in 8 sessions. What happened next in that room, nobody outside ever fully knew. But Taejun walked out alone, and he drove to Alana's apartment building and sat in the car for 40 minutes before getting out. He knocked. She opened the door. Suitcase half packed behind her, eyes that had clearly not slept, the book in her hand. He looked at it, then at her. I ended it, he said quietly. The thing that started 11 years ago. It's done. Alana said nothing. I sent someone to cancel your flight, he added. Her eyes narrowed. You did what... I know, he said. I know how that sounds. A long silence stretched between them. Then he said the only honest thing left. I don't know how to do this, any of this, but I know I can't. Watch you leave. She didn't unpack that night, but she didn't leave either. 3 weeks later, the therapy sessions resumed. Same table, same window, same Seoul skyline spreading gold and silver across the harbor. But different. Everything was different. Taejun lay down on the table and Alana placed her hands on the scars. And for the first time, neither of them pretended it was only medical. The tissue had softened. Genuinely. Weeks of treatment showing real results. His shoulder rotated freely now without locking, without compensation. Range of motion is almost completely restored, Alana said quietly. Almost, he repeated. Give it 2 more weeks. A pause. And after 2 weeks? He asked, when there's nothing left to treat. Alana's hands slowed. She came around to face him, the way she had that night in the emergency session, months ago now, when he'd first told her about the warehouse. Then, she said carefully, you'll have to find another reason to keep me around. Taejun looked at her for a long moment. I already have several, he said simply. The youngest guard, reassigned temporarily during the dangerous days, now returned, leaned toward the man beside him and whispered, Did the boss just... Yes, the other man said firmly. And you didn't see anything. That evening, they sat by the window together after the session. tea cooling between them. City lights bleeding soft across the glass. No guards in the room for once, no files, no professional distance. Just two people who had both run from something and somehow found each other in the running. You said Seoul was a fresh start, Taejun said quietly. It was, Alana replied. Did it work? He asked, the same question he'd asked weeks ago, the first time she'd mentioned Atlanta. She looked at him, then looked at the city outside, then back at him. Ask me again in a year, she said softly. Taejun nodded once. I plan to, he replied. The scars on his back never disappeared. They weren't supposed to, but the hands that rested on them now, warm, steady, unafraid, had changed what they meant. Not a warning anymore, not a wound, just proof. Proof that he had survived everything meant to destroy him, and that sometimes the thing that finally heals you walks through the wrong room at exactly the right time.